What if I told you that, right now, your brain is ignoring something that could change the entire course of your life? Not some huge sign, not a miracle, just something small, almost invisible, that has already crossed your path several times this week, and that you, without even realizing it, have dismissed as pure coincidence. Stay until the end, because I'm going to show you why what you call luck might actually be a language you've spent your whole life without learning to read. Think about the last time you thought of someone right before they texted you, or that number that started repeating itself in your life for no apparent reason. On the clock, on a license plate, on a receipt. Your rational mind will tell you it's just statistics, that with the sheer number of numbers and people out there, sooner or later something is bound to line up. And it's right, to some extent. But there's another part of you, older, quieter, that knows some coincidences carry a different weight, that not every sign holds the same emotional charge. And that difference is exactly what almost no one stops to notice. For centuries, different minds, separated by oceans and by time, arrived at a similar conclusion through completely different paths. A Florentine thinker who advised princes, a Swiss doctor obsessed with dreams, a German physicist who changed our understanding of time itself, Taoist monks who sought to flow with the world instead of fighting it, Stoic philosophers who trained the mind not to depend on the external, a Serbian inventor who claimed to listen to the universe before building it, and a man in a black turtleneck who one day decided that connecting the dots of the past was the only way to make sense of the present. All of them, without ever agreeing on it, without even knowing each other in many cases, pointed toward the same uncomfortable idea. Reality is constantly speaking to us, and most of us simply aren't listening. We've been trained to distrust anything that can't be measured with a ruler. We've been taught that if something doesn't show up on a spreadsheet, it doesn't exist. That intuition belongs to people who aren't serious. That gut feelings are meaningless mental noise. That dreams are neural garbage the brain discards while we sleep. And yet, history is full of major decisions that weren't born from cold analysis, but from an inner certainty that couldn't be fully explained, and that turned out to be right. Niccolo Machiavelli, a man unfairly reduced by most people to a manual on manipulation, was actually talking about something far deeper when he described fortune. He pictured it as a raging river, capable of sweeping away everything in its path when no one prepares for it, but also capable of being controlled, channeled, and put to use by whoever builds levees before the storm arrives. Fortune, he said, governs half of our actions, but leaves us to govern the other half, or nearly so. And here's the detail almost everyone misses. He wasn't talking about passively waiting for things to get better. He was talking about reading the terrain in advance, about moving boldly the moment the window opens, even if it only stays open for an instant. Now picture that same idea applied to your life today. That job opportunity you let slip by because you preferred to wait for the perfect moment. That intuition you felt right before signing something important, which you decided to ignore because it didn't come with a clear, logical explanation. Fortune doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It announces itself in whispers, and only those who have trained their ear to pay attention ever hear them. This is where Carl Jung comes in, along with one of the most fascinating and least understood ideas in modern psychology. Jung had spent years observing something that troubled him professionally. Patients who dreamed of a scarab beetle the very same night that, during their therapy session, a real beetle tapped against his consulting room window. People who thought intensely about someone right before that very person called. Situations where the inner world and the outer world seemed to align with no physical cause connecting them at all. He called this phenomenon synchronicity, and defined it as a meaningful connection between two events that share no causal relationship, yet appear together in a way that becomes impossible to ignore. What's interesting isn't just that it happens, but what Jung proposed about its function. According to him, these meaningful coincidences tend to occur more frequently during moments of intense psychological tension, when something inside us is demanding change, when one part of the mind is ready to take a step while the other part still resists. It's as if the unconscious, unable to communicate directly, begins arranging the outer world to leave us clues. I'm not saying the universe is magical or that some supernatural force is pulling the strings. I'm saying that perhaps, When your mind becomes deeply focused on a problem or a desire, it starts filtering reality in a completely different way, and that changes, quite radically, what you end up perceiving. And here's where all of this connects to neuroscience, in a way that will likely change how you see coincidences from today onward. At the base of your brain sits a structure called the reticular activating system. Its job is to filter the overwhelming amount of information you receive every single second. Because if your conscious mind had to process every sound, every color, every movement around you, it would collapse within minutes. This system decides what counts as relevant and what gets discarded, based largely on whatever you're already focused on. That's why, when you buy a car in a particular color, you suddenly start seeing that same car everywhere. It's not that more cars of that color have appeared on the streets. It's that your brain now considers that information relevant and stops filtering it out. Apply that same logic to your entire life. If your mind is trained to look for problems, it will find problems around every corner. If your mind is trained to look for threats, it will see threats where there's only ambiguity. But if you train your attention to look for opportunities, for signs, for meaningful connections, you'll start noticing things you never even registered before. Not because the world changed, but because you changed the filter through which you observe it. This isn't magical thinking. It's pure, documented, measurable physiology. Now I want to take you one step further, because there's something almost no one mentions when talking about signs and synchronicities, and that's the quiet role intuition plays as a kind of accelerated processing system. For decades, intuition was treated as the opposite of reason, as though the two were irreconcilable enemies. But research on decision-making has shown something different. Intuition is usually the result of thousands of patterns your brain has already processed without you ever being consciously aware of it. When you sense that something is off before you can explain why, your mind has already picked up on some tiny inconsistency, a gesture, a tone of voice, a detail out of place, and it's warning you before the logical part of your brain finishes processing the information consciously. Systematically ignoring that voice means, quite literally, discarding an early warning system you were already built with. The Stoics, long before the word neuroscience even existed, were already practicing something close to this without calling it by that name. They trained the mind to observe its own thoughts from a distance, to notice impulses and reactions without being automatically swept up by them. That same fine-tuned capacity for observation, applied not only to emotions but also to one's surroundings, is exactly what's needed to start noticing signs that used to go unnoticed. The Taoist thinkers, for their part, spoke of flowing with the natural course of events instead of forcing them, of recognizing the right moment to act instead of constantly imposing one's will in an exhausting way. It's no coincidence that so many different traditions arrived, through separate paths, at the same conclusion. Life is constantly handing us information, and wisdom lies in knowing how to read it instead of ignoring it, or twisting it to say whatever we want to hear. Steve Jobs, in a speech that's been quoted thousands of times, yet rarely understood in any real depth, explained how the dots of life can only be connected by looking backward, never forward. Seemingly pointless classes he took with no clear purpose ended up becoming the foundation for the typography that would later define an entire generation of personal computers. At the time, those decisions made no logical sense. There was no rational plan behind them. There was simply curiosity, attention, and the willingness to follow a genuine interest, even when it didn't seem to lead anywhere in particular. Only years later, looking back, did those seemingly isolated dots form a line that made perfect sense. Nikola Tesla, for his part, described his greatest discoveries not as the product of cold, isolated calculations, but as complete visions that appeared in his mind all at once, which he then simply translated into technical blueprints. Einstein, the man who redefined our entire understanding of the universe, once said that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind a faithful servant, adding, with an irony that most people miss, that we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Sit with that for a moment. The very same man who mastered the most complex mathematics of his era was warning us, more than a century ago, about an imbalance that today, in the middle of an age obsessed with data and algorithms, has only grown more extreme. And this is where I want to pause, because there's a real danger in everything I've just told you, and it would be unfair not to mention it. Listening to signs doesn't mean becoming passive, waiting for fate to solve your problems for you. It doesn't mean interpreting every single thing that happens as some cosmic message aimed exclusively at you. That would be swinging to the opposite extreme, just as damaging as denying the existence of intuition altogether. The real key, the one almost no one explains properly, lies in the balance between observing and acting. Machiavelli made this crystal clear more than 500 years ago. Fortune favors the bold, not those who sit around waiting for signs without ever lifting a finger. Noticing a meaningful coincidence means nothing if you do absolutely nothing with that information afterward. So here comes the uncomfortable question, the one you were probably waiting for from the very beginning without realizing it. How many signs have you received this past month and chosen to ignore? Out of fear, out of comfort, or simply out of habit? That person who reappeared in your life after years of silence. That idea that keeps repeating in your head every time you try to fall asleep. That job that no longer makes you feel anything, while an old idea keeps knocking on your door again and again, without you ever opening it. I'm not asking you to abandon logic or set aside critical thinking. I'm asking you to stop automatically dismissing whatever you can't explain with a formula, because that, precisely that, is usually where the most valuable information you have is hiding. I want to offer you something concrete, something you can start today, without needing to blindly believe in anything, just with the willingness to pay closer attention. Over the next 14 days, spend a couple of minutes before bed, writing down any coincidence, recurring thought, or unusual feeling you notice during the day. Don't judge what you write, don't try to interpret it right away, just record it. At the end of those 2 weeks, read through all of it at once. You'll find patterns your conscious mind would never have connected on its own, because they were scattered across time and only reveal themselves once viewed together. And then, with that information laid out in front of you, ask yourself what concrete action you can take based on what you've discovered. Because a sign without action is just an interesting anecdote. A sign followed by a courageous decision is, very often, the beginning of real change. In the end, maybe the question was never whether chance truly exists. Maybe the real question was always a different one. How much of your life are you willing to live on autopilot, ignoring what's right in front of you, waiting for everything to somehow fall into place on its own? Fortune, as those thinkers who are no longer with us, but whose words remain used to say, doesn't reward those who sit and wait. It rewards those who keep their eyes wide open and, when the sign appears, dare to move before the door closes again. If you made it to the end of this video, comment, "I made it," and I'll personally reply to you myself. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to be part of this, and hit like if you enjoyed it.